Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the brand new Sigma 90mm F2.8 DG-DN lens. This is a part of the iSeries, and which is Sigma's lineup of lenses that are designed for those whose vision of mirrorless is small and compact, and yet premium in performance. And in that sense, I guess I fit that bill fairly perfectly because this is a philosophy that I like. For the large reason that when I am packing to go out, particularly if I'm traveling with multiple lenses, which if you shoot primes, you tend to do. And so I tend to reach for lenses that are compact enough that I can take several of them along in a, still a fairly compact carry situation. And I just tend to reach for those lenses more often, even if I have maybe a superior lens in terms of maximum aperture or even performance. I'll say, all right, it's good enough. And so in that sense, this is a series that I think there are a lot of audience, there is a large audience for out there. I was very excited to see a very compact 90mm lens, and this is definitely a very compact lens. It's only 64mm in diameter with a 55mm front filter thread, and its length is even less. It's less than 60mm in length and weighs in at under 300 grams, 295 grams. So it is a very compact lens, but what's fantastic about this is that all of the compact lenses that I've seen to this point, and fortunately there are a lot of great options these days on Sony, either from Sony itself, from Samyang, from Sigma with their iSeries, but all of those lenses tend to have shorter focal lengths. And so the longest that I'm aware of that is, kind of in this truly compact category is the Samyang 75mm f1.8. And that's a useful focal length, but to get even further reach, 90mm, typically if you're gonna get out to 90mm, you've got either a larger prime lens, typically a macro lens with that kind of focal length, or you're covering it with a zoom. And so to get 90mm and an f2.8 combination, you can guarantee it's going to be a much larger lens than this. And I noted, just doing some quick research, even the Sony 90mm f2.8 macro lens, it is more than twice as long as this lens, more than twice as heavy. Obviously a completely different reality, and if you're covering it with a 70-200 lens, you're more like 3 or 4 times the size of this, and perhaps larger. And so I really like the idea of having a little bit longer telephoto focal length in this kind of setting. And it reminds me a bit of one of the earliest lenses that I used on Sony E-mount for APS-C, and that was actually a Sigma 60mm f2.8, a lens that's now discontinued, but actually had beautiful rendering, and I found to be a very useful focal length for the reasons that I've just described. So I'm really delighted to see a full frame equivalent for Sony FE and for Leica L available from Sigma at this point. If you've watched any of my previous iSeries reviews, then you know that I am a fan of the aesthetic and the design here. These are lenses that are designed really for those who appreciate good engineering, appreciate a nice tactile response. So everything here from the aperture ring, which you can either just put into automatic and control from within the camera, or you have the option of clicking in 1/3 to tenths. Everything here feels beautifully precise, a great feel to it. Though I will note there is no option to declick it for video work, unfortunately. Also, the manual focus ring is beautifully damped. Everything here is metal and glass. The degree of construction is excellent. In fact, everything is so much metal that you have an option between a traditional pinch cap and a magnetic cap that utilizes that all metal construction to fit in there. Though I will note that if you have the also all metal lens hood, beautifully ribbed, beautifully designed, but if you have that lens hood in place, it's quite deep, and if you use the magnetic cap, it is really hard to get in there and get it off unless you have long fingernails, which I don't at the moment. I can't even get it free with the hood in place. So I tend to stick with the pinch cap because it's just a little bit more of a versatile and more situations. But everything here is really, really beautifully constructed. There is just one switch, just an AF/MF switch, but always welcome to have that. There is a gasket here for weather sealing at the lens mount, though that's about the extent of the sealing in the lens itself. Inside there are 9 rounded aperture blades that do a fairly good job of keeping a circular aperture shape. There is some geometric deformation along the edges of the frame, that kind of cat eye effect that has nothing to do with the shape of the aperture and more is just an optical aberration, a byproduct of most lenses' optical designs. Here we have the ability to focus down to 50 centimeters, and at that 50 centimeter focus distance you have a 1:5 magnification ratio, 0.20 times, and so that's certainly a very useful figure. Allows you to get close to things and blur out backgrounds. So I find that to be useful, and it's an aspect of photography that I personally love. I love taking those kinds of shots. I enjoy that process a lot. I will note, however, that I found image quality not be at 100% level at that minimum focus distance. You're maybe getting 90% of the overall performance. Just a little bit more of haze on some of the textures, contrast not quite as high. Not a big deal, obviously, but certainly if you just move back a little bit further, you get sharper still results. When it comes to the autofocus performance, like all of these lenses, it's pretty much boilerplate at this point. There's a stepping motor that's being employed. I did find a few more misses with this lens than what I have typically with this series, and what I mostly saw those misses on were some false positives when it came to animal IAF, and in these sequences, either using my Alpha 1 or a Sony a6600, both very good focus systems, I got false positives sometimes on lock on IAF and got some front focus. Though, other situations like this, obviously you can see that focus was nailed. And so overall focus performance was good. I just did notice a few more of those misses, which kind of surprised me, because these days, it's typically IAF, either for humans or animals, is pretty much bulletproof. And so, maybe a firmware update, or maybe the final firmware on the release might make that a little bit better. But overall focus accuracy was good results. It was also very reliable for doing these kind of sessions where I was on camera, and I found this actually to be a very useful focal length and an intriguing option if you're shooting in auditoriums, medium-sized auditoriums like churches or other venues where you're wanting to frame a main speaker. It's a great focal length for that, and so I actually utilized that several times over the course of my review period. I've used it for that purpose, and that to me would be maybe one of the most intriguing options for me. That combination of an f2.8 aperture, that focal length, and then a nice compact and relatively inexpensive lens to use in that kind of application. Certainly worth considering. Now, my assistant Craig, who focuses more on video, noted something that I did as well, and that is that if you are relying on autofocus for focus pulls, you kind of go along, as you can see in this shot, until it finally gets in the center focus, it gets what it wants in focus, and then that focus pull is really quite abrupt. It's kind of like a whiplash effect. And so, as always, if you want to get really smooth focus pulls, you probably want to do manual focus. And fortunately, that works fairly well, though, focus by wire lenses are never as good as a true manual focus lens for that absolute control, having hard mechanical stops, all of those things, if you're familiar with that process. I did note a bit of focus breathing as well, but again, these problems are fairly typical, and the strengths were pretty good from the lens. So overall, my autofocus accuracy was good. So how about the image quality? Image quality here is very, very sharp, and other than a little bit of softening, as I noted, at close focus distances, at my testing, like chart testing, the lens is extremely sharp from f2.8 on, and so very good contrast, very consistent curve across the frame of performance. You stop down to f4 and contrast just jumps still to where you can see the Mar pattern here, just from being so sharp and so high contrast. And by the time you get to smaller landscape apertures, f6, 5.6, f8, the lens is just bitingly sharp from corner to corner. So an impressive little optic when it comes to that. The weakness here is that there is a fair amount of pincushion distortion, and it kind of reminds me of the 85mm f1.4 DN in that metric. I needed a -11 in Lightroom to correct for that distortion, but fortunately it was nice and linear and it did correct fine. An average amount of vignette, about a +49 to correct for. Obviously, when all the correction profiles are available in software, that will take care of RAWs, and already the Sigma lenses do get corrections for both JPEGs and video in camera. So probably not much of a significant problem. The lens will show some flare artifacts, a bit of veiling, a bit of ghosting. I found the veiling to be fairly artistic, and as you can see from these stop-down shots with sun stars, you can see there are a few different artifacts, ghosting artifacts, but nothing overly destructive. It's got a nice deep lens hood, and so if you utilize that and are careful with your framing, shouldn't be a problem. Bokeh quality looks quite good to me, and it's not as amazing as some of the larger aperture lenses, obviously, but I think that I saw a lot of images that looked really good, pro grade to me, and so I appreciate the bokeh quality. Other than that, chromatic aberrations are well controlled, no other real optical flaws, and so this is a nice package overall. At the end of the day, there's a kind of a blessing and a curse in a more unusual focal length. The blessing is that the market is saturated at certain focal lengths. I noted when reviewing the 24mm f2 that was announced at the same time as this, that although that lens is fantastic, there are so many existing options that it's going up against because there have been so many 24mm lenses that have been released, even compact ones, on Sony. So here we have a 90mm lens that is a far less common focal length. But the challenge, of course, is that it is not going to be anyone's primary focal length, most likely. It's going to be a complementary one. And so that means that market gets, whittled down a little bit. At a price point of $639, there's two ways to look at this. That may seem like an expensive price point for a lens that only has a maximum aperture of f2.8. At the same time, this is very much a premium lens in terms of both its build and its performance. And so if your priority is getting compact yet premium, I think that this definitely suits the bill. And in that sense, I think it does justify the price tag. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review. You can also find linkage there to an image gallery if you want to check out more photos, get a feel for the lens. Beyond that, there are buying links if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. Some of those links still populating because the lens is brand new. There's also linkage to follow myself or Craig on social media, to become a patron, to purchase my merchandise, sign up for my newsletter, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Be sure to ring the bell so you get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.